here what we have to understand is government and the international financial institutions are the key factors or key parties to make the decision to invest or to conduct the large-scale dam. So that directly affect to the indigenous peoples who is considered legally as a right holders. But what happens is in the course of decision making, the indigenous peoples are never been recognized. That is the fundamental challenge. The second challenge is before making any decision, they often do the various studies and research about the projects. The indigenous peoples, they are invisible in their reports. That's the second challenge. Third challenge is even indigenous peoples are informed, and if they know about those things going on, but they don't provide any detailed discourse. So that is the another detailed disclosure. So they don't know about the adverse impact. They only, informed about the positive things. And when in the course of the constructing those dams, then a lot of adverse impact, they have to face it. And then what happened? There is the conflict. So that is the third challenge. So these are the general overview. So how we can overcome from this challenge? First of all, we have to understand that the problem is money. In many developing countries, what happened is when money comes, then the government start these kinds of large dams and other projects, including the hydro project, which is the annexed or associated another project of the dams in many cases. So that's why the key factor is the money. So what happens is the financial institution says that it's ultimately the decision, it's vested upon the government, and it's a national policies, and we have nothing to do about that one. Often they say about that one. But what I would like to say is it's a money that is the key factor. So to overcome about these challenges, first of all, indigenous people should be recognized as right holders. What we call in a legal term is a person who has a right and obligation in the initial phase. So when there is a discussion going on, and then the bank, the government, and indigenous peoples, is a tripartite negotiations or tripartite dialogue should be take place. And if the dam will have the potential adverse impact, so indigenous people should, their rights of right to say no, let's say the FP, free, prior, and informed consent. More than that, the right to self-determination, if that is impacting their livelihood, if that is impacting to their every rights, political rights, and rights to their lands, and they should have a right to say no. So kinds of veto, that should be recognized, because if that part is ignored, then a lot of, the casualties and then the sorrow that we have to face it. For an example, in my own country, we have a Kosi High Dam, which is considered as a sorrow of the indigenous peoples and local peoples from India and Nepal, because that will have a impact to India and Nepal. So that's why it is the first thing that indigenous people should be recognized as a party to decide whether the dam should be taken place or not. The second one, what happened is the environment policies of the financial institutions. Let's say, for an example, ADB or World Bank, that recognize the indigenous peoples, but which is not mandatory. So this is more or less, it's a kind of moral. It has a moral obligations in a legal term. So these kinds of moral policies, moral obligatory policies, has no sense. So that's why the legal, it should be mandatory, right? So the environmental policies, safeguard policies on indigenous peoples, it should be mandatory. That should be applied to all financial institutions. The third one, the rights of indigenous peoples in relation to land, territories, and natural resources, lands, that also associated with the waters. Also, it comes the waters as well. So the indigenous peoples has a sovereign rights over these rights because that is they are the custodian, so they don't consider as a commodity. So what I would like to indicate is the water and then the lands and resources, the colonizer concept they consider is a commodity, but the indigenous peoples, based on their indigenism, it is not the commodity. It's a things that it's a very sacred and it has to be respected. That notion has to be recognized by the financial institutions and their policies and the government laws and policies as well. The participation in every stages, and then also the benefit sharing is utmost. And based on my study, what I like to highlight is the existing policies, the financial policies of financial institution, financial policies of the government, and then the financial policies of national banks. That's also sometimes jointly or in consortium, they invest in these kinds of large dams. It should be synchronized, should be harmonized as well. And then in every stage of reform of these policies, indigenous people should be a part, and their rights of ethic and their right to say no should be respected.